Welcome to the second position of thought toward objectivity. The history of philosophy beholds the transition to this second position more closely than we do here. This position harbors a mistrust of thinking. So this is the first time we get a mistrust of thinking, which means that it's Descartes.
Could you zoom in, please?
Oh yes, of course. This position harbors a mistrust of thinking, the conviction that it is impossible for thinking to get at truth. Descartes again. It thus separates thinking off from the truth, and indeed off from objectivity in general. This separation comes in two versions: empiricism and the Kantian critical philosophy. Empiricism asserts that one gets the truth only through sense experience as such. Our thinking must orient itself around sense experience so that thinking is sidelined. The critical philosophy considers more closely than empiricism what experience means. It contemplates what is perceived in opposition to thinking. It sets the two determinately over against each other and tries to show by thinking itself, by its own doing, that thinking is incompetent to apprehend the truth. The uniting of thinking and experiencing for Kant yields appearance, whereas thinking by itself makes totalities, like the world, the soul, and God, into proper objects. But in so doing, thinking no longer has experience of anything, as it falls into a labyrinth of representations and contradictions. This is the second position, which on the whole is the principal standpoint of our time. With this second standpoint is connected a third standpoint, that of immediacy, as in, for example, Jacobi. According to this third standpoint, thinking serves only to bring true knowledge into a state of confusion and thus is generally incompetent. So in the third position, Jacobi claims that truth is just immediate being itself. But what is empiricism? Empiricism is of the greatest antiquity. The skeptics, in particular, called themselves empiricists. They were quite conscious of having to do only with appearances. Yet true empiricism is modern empiricism, which comes to us from England, Locke. We are all naturally born empiricists. We all perceive by our senses, we all rely on our sense perception. From metaphysical thinking, we all return in relief back again to empiricism, which proceeds polemically, ferreting out what is true in our experiences. The contradictions in which metaphysics lost its way have precipitated this return to sense perception. The onset of a mistrust in a priori knowledge resulted in pure empiricism. The devil, miracles, magic, and superstitions were allegedly all mixed in with metaphysics. Those caught up in superstition have indeed set out from thoughts of a general nature. Superstition has indeed made us of metaphysical thinking. It has made use of metaphysical thinking to vindicate itself. The desire which now asserted itself was to consider nature and its laws merely for themselves, and from this the grand principle of empiricism has proceeded. One can also get to empiricism starting from the spiritual side, as magic and witchcraft embrace a capricious side of our humanity. So there has been a quite different arbitrariness prescribed in the political rule under which human beings live out their lives. Empiricism called again into question the issue of the divine right of kings at a time when it was previously said that the monarchical principle was above all criticism. It is against this monarchical tyranny of accident and arbitrariness that empiricism asserts itself. We have entered into the same inquiry with respect to what the peoples of the world have allowed to pass as international customary law and as internal state law. In empiricism, the need arose to give validity to the wealth of representations over against metaphysical and political abstractions. However, the endless extension of empirically based disputation has made us to realize that by empiricism we might just end up demolishing everything. We have it in our power to make everything taller, and there has arisen the need for a firm hold on something. That's note 12. Hegel appears to allude to the reign of terror in the French Revolution. Note What I am to believe, I must myself have seen or perceived with my own senses, with my own eyes, or at the very least others must have perceived it. Thus it must reveal itself to me to be present in what is perceived. Nature has been made the metaphysical object of such reasoning, and what is present in nature has been inferred from abstract principles. In opposition to this, empiricism said that whatever is present in sensory objects must be perceived, and that it is perception which gives credence and which supplies the content of belief. Here lies the principle of subjective freedom in individual judgment. Philosophy, like empiricism, knows only what is. What is true for philosophy is also actual, and at the same time, only what is rational is truly actual. I will just reread that because it's famous. What is true for philosophy is also actual, and at the same time, only what is rational is truly actual. Whatever is bad in existence, without being bad in concept, is null. Philosophy is concerned with what is, and this has in common with empiricism. It is far easier to say what ought to be than to say what is. Also a nice one-liner. Oh. If truth is to lie in what is, to state truth is more difficult than to say what ought to be. We begin by passing judgment on something, by the standard of what it ought to be. What is false in a thing is thus quickly found, but it is more difficult to discern genuine article. So it's easier to say what's false than to say what's true about being. Empiricism and metaphysics share experience in common. According to representations which it itself presupposes, metaphysics likewise has its ground in experience. It proceeds from representations grounded in experience. But we must distinguish the sense perception on which empiricism is based from experience in Kant. A perception is but a single representation. In general, nothing singular qualifies as an experience. Perception is feeling, internal or external intuition. Experience belongs to the form of general representations and statements. Empirical science, the science of experience, distinguishes species. The laws of nature and of spirit belong to experience. Experience of this sort is something universal. Its triumph lies in recognizing the universal in the singular. The forces of nature are something transitory and singular in their various expressions, but in experience, they come to be apprehended as universal. The universal comes to be fixed in the mind, and the apprehension of it is thinking. When one has apprehended the universal in an event, one has at once accorded to the event its legitimate rights, what we derive from it as truth. So, the essence of what we call experience lies in universality. The essence of experience lies in universality. This notwithstanding, universality in the form assumed in experience is not supposed by empiricism to have validity for itself on its own account. The validity of experience, according to empiricism, let me just go back. This notwithstanding, universality in the form assumed in experience is not supposed by empiricism to have validity for itself on its own account. So he's saying empiricism points us to a certain contradiction. He's not saying empiricism is false and I have the truth or something. The validity of experience according to empiricism is not to be based on thinking or the universal. The fact that an electrical force exists in general, for example, is not to be based on the fact that the force develops as a category of logic in this particular way. For its universal content would then be discovered and proven merely by thinking. In empiricism, the two sides of universality and particularity are so positioned as to deny the particular as the universal for its basis. Rather, the believability of the universal content is to rest solely on the perception. It will be said by empiricists that thinking has no place here, so that experience and thinking come to be set in opposition. But in order to discover something universal, one must already believe in its existence. Kepler started out with the belief that reason, the universal, had to exist in the planetary system. Experience enjoys certainty by the immediacy of its existence with the object. The object is such and such, and I, the subject, know it certainly to be so. Something external, an object of my experience, has being, and in that it falls within me. It is identical with me. A consistent empiricism, which throughout lays something sensory down as its foundation, leads to a denial of everything supernatural. Naturalism, materialism, proceeds from what is sensory. In the Kantian philosophy, what is singular has been isolated from form, which has been cast into relief. Regarding the two forms of universality and necessity, it has been established that they are nowhere to be found in ordinary sensory perception. We have absolutely no such perception, for example, of the all. We so limit the all as to say that what is meant by it is only all things of which we know. But someone who says all men are mortal is not merely saying that all men we know of are mortal. What is meant is rather that man is mortal. We call this an induction, but it can never be complete. So we see that we cannot obtain universality by perception. We can never know all men particularly, but we can extract the universal from the particular man that we know, to rephrase what Hegel says. As for necessity, it is the totality back into which the system of essences return. All universality, when cast into relief, belongs to the self-concept. In perception as such, we have no necessity, but have only what is side by side in space, and before and after in time. What is singular, however, is not isolated, but is connected with what is beyond it. Yet the interconnection in perception is purely sensory. It is not necessary. In space, everything has its place side by side with other things. Thus, in inner space, we have a multiplicity of representations all side by side. And so it is also with time. First something is, and afterwards it's no more. We get closer to cause and effect, but what presents itself to perception is, now this is, but afterwards something else is. However, that the succession hangs together as cause and effect is not given in perception. The interconnection of cause and effect lies outside time, for something is a cause only insofar as it has an effect. They are inseparably bound up with each other. Their unity lies outside time. In sensory appearance, to be sure, the one comes after the other, but this appearance is already foreign to the interconnection of cause and effect. That's amazing. So universality and necessity are not found in sense perception. From their absence in perception, the conclusion has been drawn by empiricism that they have no truth, but are only a matter of habit, of my own distinct nature, of what is necessary to me, a necessity always limited to me. What is in question is thus only subjective necessity. Universality is thus only a purported universality. Laws of jurisprudence thus appear to be accidental. Hume came to this view, a follower of Locke. He drew the right conclusion as to the Lockean substance that we fail to perceive. We perceive neither cause nor effect. Law and custom are supposed to have validity for themselves. They are supposed to be universal, but universality is given a different interpretation by the skeptics. Law and custom are supposed to belong to the nature of spirit, but the skeptics then said that law and custom, to be valid, must show themselves to be present everywhere, so that any place where they are not found represents a miscarriage of a law and custom. If we consider existence empirically, we do not see by experience that freedom, for example, is a universal property of human beings. But with that, the universal right to property is attacked. It is said that property is only a habit introduced at some point or other. In religion, there occurs the very same manner of proceeding. There are lots of religions. When the experience is called to bear witness as to the constitution of religion, it teaches nothing determinate in the matter. Neither in religion nor in the matter of free will is anything fixed by experience. This is the system of philosophy that passes for modern skepticism. It has assumed that experience is the foundation of all that is true. An important conclusion that follows is that all violence and lawlessness are grounded in experience, in what is factual. Humean skepticism is opposed to fixed principles. He made perceiving into the foundation. Ancient skepticism rather taught against the Humean view that perception is mere appearance. Things are and at once are not, for they are variable. The ancient skeptics exhibited appearance in the place of being, and in this respect, modern skepticism is quite the opposite. What we call necessity becomes in the empiricist system nothing but subjective necessity. But within empiricist perceiving, which wants to have nothing but contempt for thinking, thinking nonetheless enters as a sense perception, as sense perception becomes experience, which is what Kant makes us aware of. Species, laws, they are all universal. Composition or aggregation is also a universal category, but is the worst of all categories. For composite things remain quietly outside one another and lack unity which any living being must have. Need simplicity, Max, to say it in this way. Thus, empiricism, in an entirely unconscious manner, conceals the logical categories and yet makes use of them, but without knowing what it is doing or even wanting to know. Philosophy has for its object nothing other than what is. What is. But the experience of empiricism prefers the very worst of thought determinations. This is the reflection on empiricism made by the Kantian philosophy, which we will go in next. Empiricism and skepticism. The first time the second position of thought is born. And also how progressive they are in the history of philosophy. They point us to contradictions that we can really work from. You know?
Yeah.
But Hegel does say they have contempt for thinking.
I didn't expect Hume to be in this so much. He did a lot of dealing with Hume and interacting with causality and showing the subjectivity that is within this approach.
I think a key word here that we can introduce is ethical substance, because what empiricism doesn't understand is that things like cause and necessity, but also law and custom, are universal concepts that we don't get from experience, yet there's a necessity to them. It's not merely a habit. And to say it's merely a habit, then you can't actually understand the historical becoming of, let's say, religion or the nation state. I think that's what Hegel tried to point us to with that.
It's interesting also to hear all sorts of, like, let's say, epistemological problem with pure empiricism. What was the contradiction again? About...
Jason, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
You're a bit quiet.
Is this better?
Yeah.
I forgot my ESPN headset. I was saying something about the epistemological issues with pure empiricism. And what was the contradiction within empiricism again? Something to do with the essence of the universality. I thought that was very interesting, how I was able to, like, reverse it like that.
Yeah, I think I just pointed to it, that there is so what in experience you do make up the fact that moments are successive. First this happens, then that happens. But something like cause and effect, those are universal concepts. So he says a man is mortal, and an empiricist can come up to you and say, okay, but you don't know all men.
Yeah.
So how can you say that? But the problem is that all this statement, all men are mortal, then you have, okay, mortality as a universal. The empiricist does make use of these universal concepts to live, and doesn't just like violate the law of your ethical substance, but it doesn't admit this. So that's kind of where it has contempt for thinking, and
it's not valid to the empirical framework to have this universal stuff, right? Everything is particularized.
I think that's what they consciously proclaim, but unconsciously they're already acting out,
of course,
the necessity of the universal.
Say that point again, because I think I have something on it. Say what you're saying again, Dimitri.
So by I think there's a necessity to universality, and if I come up to you and you say all men are mortal, then if I'm an empiricist, I say, yeah, but you don't know all men.
Yes. Problem of induction.
Yes, that's exactly what Hegel
Yeah,
said.
induction.
But Hegel is
So-
saying, yeah, but I don't have to know all the particulars because it's already it's already universal by thinking it, and we necessarily make use of universals in the very actualization of spirit.
What Hume would say is, yeah, I mean, I can just be a skeptic when I'm a philosopher, but when I'm playing my backgammon, I just don't think about it. That's roughly actually what he said.
What? I'm not sure if I understand that.
Hume had this radical skepticism, as we all know.
Right, modern skepticism.
Induction. Yeah. And people are saying, well, is this not a big issue, Hume? And he's like, well, yeah, when you're a philosopher, when you think like a philosopher, it's an issue. But when I'm playing my backgammon, I just don't think about it.
Ah, yes. It's a very neat trick, I think Hegel does make the same trick in the beginning of the lectures on logic, because he's making the distinction, and it's very tricky. You can't really use it too much because then you can seem very arrogant. But he says, yeah, there's ordinary consciousness with the ordinary truth, but there's also real knowing with higher truth. And this is what philosophy is interested in. But by doing that, yeah, of course you can say, yeah, but that's just my ordinary consciousness, and I actually have the higher truth if it doesn't suit your higher truth. Yeah.
And it's interesting how, ancient skepticism, he says, is an inversion of this Humean skepticism. I thought that was super interesting, how in ancient skepticism they prioritize universality over appearance, and in this Humean empiricism it's an affirmation of kind of pure experience.
Can you go a bit more deep into that, the ancient skepticism?
Sure, yeah.
They are actually empiricists, right? He says, well, the skeptics called themselves empiricists.
Say that again.
Hegel says about the ancient skeptics that they called themselves empiricists.
Where's that part?
Oh God, I'm at the first position again. Let me see the second one. Okay, so he says here,
he says on page 30, I was just looking at page 30 here. He says, ancient skepticism rather taught against the Humean view that perception is mere appearance.
Yeah, and here on page 52, he says, empiricism is of the greatest antiquity. The skeptics in particular called themselves empiricists. They were quite conscious of having to do only with appearances. Yet true empiricism is modern empiricism.
What do you make of this on page 30 when he says this where he says ancient skepticism is
where is that?
Rather
ancient skepticism rather taught against the human perception that the perception is mere appearance. I think
things are and at once are not. They are variable. The ancient skeptics exhibited appearance in the place of being.
I think, okay, so
and in this respect, modern skepticism is quite the opposite.
Yeah, that's a very interesting statement. I think
because I mean I read that, like I don't know that much about ancient skepticism, but there's a skepticism that arises because experience is constantly changing and thus is not a proper foundation for truth. So there's sort of a skepticism that emerges from the very unstable ground of experience.
I think that what you describe in your paper is this skepticism that it gets positive content and it just throws it back into the abyss, right? So I think that's the ancient skepticism, whereas I mean, I'm still thinking it through, of course, but the modern skepticism would be opposed to saying that appearance is mere appearance and it extracts something out of it, which is habit. But out of this habit is actually, if you explicate that further, that's actually the necessity of the universal.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. And in that way, there's I can see the inversion there. Because in the ancient skeptical view, you can't trust appearance, and so you throw it into the empty abyss. In the modern Humean skepticism, you actually derive your habits from experience. You return again to this sort of common sense experience, and you can't trust fixed abstractions. They do you no good in that way.
But yeah, again, it is Hegel saying that they can't understand something like religion, because that really, and the historical becoming of religion, because that requires universal thinking. I think that's really, that's really something great about Hegel's thought of spirit as a historical process, is because he's also looking around and seeing, okay, wait a second, there's not just like ideas and then the material world, but by acting out, I'm already acting out ideas, and if this is being done on a societal scale, then there's like a concrete universality to that. Like that's what Hegel, what Zizek, of course, also critiques in ideology, that you don't have to believe in capitalism to act out capitalism. As a matter of fact, you can be the most communist person, and in this way, like help the self-propelling of capital in its process.
So is Hegel looking at ancient skepticism through Hume? Or is he just comparing Hume to ancient skepticism? Because there does seem to be several different forms of ancient skepticism. Like, you have Pyrrhonianism, which was very close to Hume. And then you have other stuff, Carnegie's, Aurelius, Cicero.
I don't know.
Does the ancient have a different understanding or meaning of appearance than the modern empiricist? For instance, the modern empiricist explicitly requires it to be sense data. Is this does the ancient form of skepticism also prioritize perception?
It says all appearance is mere appearance.
Right, but
like, could thought be an appearance in the
right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But what I like is that somewhere in there, Hegel discusses like the various uses of empiricism, and it's what my favorite one is to go against arbitrariness, and how and superstitions and things like that.
And so with the cause, and let's just come back to the cause and effect aspect. So
Junction.
He's sort of, Hegel's sort of saying, okay, with this, empiricist outlook, what you really have is just kind of this arising and passing away of moments, and that the subject really imputes the notion of cause and effect, that A is somehow logically related and causes B. Is that and is this where Hume sort of, I haven't read Hume, so maybe you guys, Max, you can chip in here, but is Hume sort of deconstructing these categories of cause and effect as universal and thus not backed by a raw empiricism?
I think he would say it's he would say, you can say it's universal, but that's your idea of it. That's right, that Hegel talks about you use universal concepts, and it's like, yeah, it's your necessity. You perceive that as a necessity. So that's it would be like making saying that it's subjective.
Yeah, the necessity is so Hume comes along and just says, well, where are you finding this causality in experience, like out there, not in yourself?
Yeah.
But Hegel seems to be coming along and, well, like Kant, well, the causality is coming from within us. Now, I would love to know, where is Hegel just repeating what Kant said here, or is he actually going on further? Because this sounds very Kantian in the sense that we give the necessity of causality to the world.
I think that with
connected it with time, right? That causality is outside of time, outside of
exactly.
Yeah, I don't know if that's how
that actually, that part I feel like I'm struggling to
let's
understand, because I would
deconstruct
say
that.
well, how are we understanding time? Of course, right? With that, like, from this perspective, cause and effect would seem to exist within our sort of picture thinking temporality, right?
Yeah.
We're creating this linear temporality, and from that we're deriving this notion of cause and effect out there. So when he says it doesn't exist within in time, maybe he's talking about a more imminent temporal becoming
this is what Kant is saying. I mean, Kant says that, again, we give it what is the first part of the critique, Jason, where he has where Kant is talking about time and space.
Yeah, I don't remember anymore.
Well, they're part of his a priori categories, right? And so yeah,
right.
So to say, and even, I mean, even if you think about the phenomenology, there seems to be a necessary, you have this negation, and then you have this, there seems to be cause and effect seems to play in this movement of shapes of consciousness. So yeah, this claim that causality wouldn't be in time seems to be very interesting.
The way I think about it is that with causality, the problem with causality, the issue is that is not whether or not it exists or anything like that. The issue is that, is it outside or is it consciousness that makes this conjunction, right? That's the word. And if causality is to be a thing of its own out there, right? Like what most people think, right? People think causality is just out there, it's just a thing that happens. Then there seems to be a third moment in thing A hitting thing B.
Yes. Yes.
So, but when we realize that we make the conjunction, it's actually just A hitting B. I don't know. What do you have to say?
Yeah.
Well, this is interesting. Well, I'll just give bring in a totally different perspective just to throw it in there. The Buddhist sort of deconstruction of cause and effect is sort of essentially in some way similar. It's saying, okay, if there is any kind of extension in space and extension in time, it's infinitely divisible. So it's like you can't basically you can't separate A and B and then say they're causally interacting. And so in Buddhism, this sort of deconstructive mode delivers you to this notion of codependent origination in Buddhism, which is basically like it's everything is just wildly interdependent and interconnected, and so there is no way to really establish these kind of strict linear causal relationships.
Right.
We're getting there, guys, because I think Jason and Quinn, what you guys said, like, really link up nicely, because I'll first read the Hegel quote, then I'll tell my point of view, and I think it all ties together. However, that the succession hangs together as cause and effect is not given in perception. The interconnection of cause and effect lies outside time. For something is a cause only insofar as it has an effect. They are inseparably bound up with each other. Their unity lies outside time. In sensory appearance, to be sure, the one comes after the other. But this appearance is already foreign to the interconnection of cause and effect.
Right.
So how is he making this step? Well, Quinn, what you said is very nice. Like, it's a nice step in the dialectic, but the question is, what's the cause of the cause? Like,
Yeah.
what is the cause of the cause? And the
well,
cause
yeah.
of the cause is the subject.
Well, exactly. Well,
Because
that's
there
what I was
is
gonna
no
say.
there is
Well,
there
right.
is no other of the other, to put it in Lacanian, you know, like the cause of the cause is the subject, as like, you know, capital C cause of the causes. And that's really the speculative step that Hegel was making.
Right. The speculative. Yeah, exactly.
And you're already doing this by acting like as a free agent.
Right, because if causality is out there as its own thing, then it would be bound up with other shit. You know, we wouldn't be able to make a determination that this causes that. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, yeah, man. No, it's very
So it's outside of
fascinating
time.
because
It's outside of time, yeah.
because I do. It's like, yeah, I do think if you take the Buddhist deconstructive model and you take it far enough, I do think it returns you back to the kind of abyssal subjectivity, like that. It kind of it wraps around, and you get the disintegration of the time form and absolute no. Like you get that move where it does you sort of you exit a kind of picture thinking temporality, what you know, whatever that means. It's just this notion of time and absolute knowing, it's really
I think what some problem you can come to by the steps we're making is that you stop at thinking, oh, they're inseparable, because then you don't know what the cause of the cause is, or like what is the cause for itself.
What do you mean you say they're inseparable? What
Well, look, that's what Buddhism can think, the inseparability of cause effect. The fact that the cause doesn't come with the effect doesn't come with the cause. The one doesn't have the meaning without the other. But Hegel's making the next step, and that's what I would say is seeing the subject as the cause of the cause, and therein like also seeing that I just lost my thought. The subject of the cause as the cause, and the fact that if you have this cause and effect, that it can end up in a bad infinity. You know, if you're merely referring one to the other again, you're like, oh yeah, but cause is external to effect, so I go there to effect, and then but cause, like I just go back and forth. But there's a third thing binding them, the subject. And Barth says this, like dialectics is always a three. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're right.
Now, we have the subject as cause of cause. So it's a subject in charge of everything, basically.
Would you agree with instead of cause that the subject is doing the cause, like the subject is the one who's, I don't know. It's the same thing, I guess. Yeah.
Is this sort of connected to Lacan's objet ad sort of
I don't know.
I would connect it to Lacan's there is no other of the other, because if you're trying to ground cause, that's the move. Like that's what I forgot to say. Like Hegel is seeing, remember we were talking about subjects and predicates, and then we're saying, okay, spirit is simple. Okay, but we don't know if this word simple is even true. So then we're asking the question, what is this simplicity for itself? And that's like asking, like, what is the cause of the cause, is asking the same question as what is the cause for itself. And you need subject for that. And I think Kant, in Alenka Zupancic's book on Kant and Lacan, this is basically she praises Kant actually, for bringing us to this speculative moment that we can actually think the antinomies and their binding. Something like thought and being would be an antinomy, but nonetheless, it's necessity.
Yeah. What else did this? Yeah, go ahead.
But I just see in all of this, apart from the absolute knowing, so much Kantianism in it.
I mean, he is
this is
discussing the different.
this is objective idealism.
Yeah.
Everything hinges on the subject.
Now, Hegel says it's not, well, yes, but it's not subjective idealism. Hegel explicitly says that he's not doing subjective idealism, and I forgot where it was.
But this is not describing Hegel's position, right? This is Hegel describing others' positions. So if this would be
He hasn't
like,
even gotten to Kant yet, right?
right,
it's not the it's not the end point.
right, right. So I would say Kant, it does not escape the subjective idealism, right? He's stuck in there basically.
Kant.
Kant, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not Hegel's position.
No, because Hegel, the way Hegel says it's that his philosophy is not subjective idealism, is that he says that it's not merely my subject, but it's it's universal for subjectivity as such, you know.
There's also like an openness to Hegel's subjectivity, right?
But isn't Kant saying the same thing of the a priori categories, that those are objective categories of subjectivity?
Right. It's a bit it's slightly more complicated, right? Because Hegel's idea of truth is very different from Kant's idea of truth. They both have the same operation of like what how we acquire knowledge, but for Kant you still have like Kant still saves correspondence theory, whereas Hegel doesn't follow that. But I would say yes, Kant for Kant the a priori and the the categories are universal, but it's universal for each and every single one of us. So you have the categories, I have the categories, Dimitri have the categories, Max have the categories, and from there we basically, because of that, we see the same world, but we never really meet each other. We just we're
Would
all
you say Kant is a solipsist? That's a
no,
question I
no,
can't.
because there is the noumenon. Because we still get the sense data from the noumenon.
Okay.
So there is an outside for Kant. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the whole
Yeah.
problem, right?
Yeah. He saves his ass. Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole thing is the noumenon. They
Hmm?
are basically very similar, Kant and Hegel, but the big thing is this idea of the noumenon versus the absolute.
Right. The project after Kant seems to be in getting rid of the noumenon.
Yeah.
Nobody likes the noumenon.
No, Hegel sublates it. He
Yeah.
incorporates it. He eats it up and shits it out.
Well, if you are operating on the Christian paradigm, basically what Kant says is you can't get to know God through reason. It's only faith.
Yeah. He opens up faith.
Yeah, if you're reading Hegel as a Christian, it's, as we've said before, this sort of hermetic relational aspect, this journey of coming to know God through reason.
Well, this is the very difference, right? There's one where it's coming to know God, right? So for Kant, to know something properly is knowing within the limits. So you know it's precisely that you have this limit that you can know something very, very nicely. So, but for Hegel, it's almost like, okay, so for Kant, you have a relationship with God through knowledge, which is to say you fail to know God, and so you have faith. But for Hegel, it's like you have a relationship with God, because in a way you are God, you can be God or something like that. So
Kant's trying to find God as a finite determination
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
that he
yeah.
can then know. But hey, it's sort of that's another, that's the radicality of the inversion. It's the
There you
absolute
get
knowing.
the
It's
understanding
it's
versus
the
reasoning.
process. You don't reach a certain, finite determination that is
Yeah.
the absolute. It's just you've communed with this
Right.
strange
Yeah,
process.
there is a communion for Hegel, right? What is it called again? Gnosis or kenosis, something like that, where you
Kenosis
become
is the
Kenosis.
self-emptying.
Yeah,
where you
he uses
become,
that
yeah,
language actually. Yeah.
right. This is the Hermetic Hegel
But,
Kant
again.
does. Kant writes has a piece. It's called "Religion Only Within the Limits of Reason."
Right.
yeah.
Maybe nice to have a look at.
Well, yeah.
But I think that Kant is actually trying to build a fortress around faith. He's trying to salvage faith
Oh yeah, absolutely.
in the Enlightenment. I mean, he understands, or he's sort of not fully trusting of reason and what reason can
Well,
do.
I think in this thing we just read about empiricism, Hegel kind of echoes Kant in saying that empiricism is kind of, it demolishes stuff,
Yeah.
right? It can at the same time, the power of empiricism to save us from arbitrariness is precisely the kind of thing that will destroy everything.
That's a
So
fascinating
yeah,
point.
yeah.
Really crazy point, actually.
But
Can you say that again, Jason?
I think that's Kant's point. Okay, so in what we read earlier, Hegel points out that the function of empiricism is to steer us away from arbitrariness. But this very power, this same thing, can also lead us to like demolish everything. I think that's the word he uses, actually, demolish. Because then you can just
No,
doubt stuff endlessly.
so there is no separation really. I mean, empiricism and skepticism go hand in hand.
What would be the difference?
So this is also an etymological historical thing, because
Yeah.
the ancient skeptics themselves called themselves empiricists. But
Right.
the modern empiricism is kind of an inversion
Yeah.
of skepticism that nonetheless kind of also is a skepticism, insofar as it throws every universality you bring out of the door. And no, I don't accept it. That's your universality. I feel differently. I have habits, whatever.
There's still this
for
abyss that
Kant,
things are being thrown into.
Yeah, and Kant is saying, yes, but they're still there. Necessity, universality, all these things, cause and effect, they keep popping up and they're still there. And Hegel, Hegel makes I don't know actually if it's Hegel, I would have to read deeper onto it, but there's the concrete universality, the instantiation of it in the processual becoming of spirit in the ethical science.
So where Hume just plays backgammon, Kant just works through it. Kant doesn't take it at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This etymological point that you bring up is very interesting, but I haven't read Sellers, but the Seller, so but even the title is something interesting to riff on. Is the myth of the given? The empiricist accepts the given. The skeptic doesn't.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the same distinction that Hegel is making. The skeptic think it's mere appearance.
Right? He's part of the Pittsburgh Hegelian movement. He's an American Hegelian. Makes perfect sense. What's next?
What is how do you define the given, givenness here? Or understand it?
If I were to answer that, what the given is, like for Kant, for instance, the categories are a given. Or something like this. Rationality is for Kant a given. So that we have regularities in the world is a given. Therefore, thoughts are regular. Is also
Is it not like over and against you, like objective?
Yeah, there's also a sure, yeah. But the rational is also over and against you, right? Like this is just you. For instance,
Is the rational then given?
Yeah, for Kant, the rational is given. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, because no, by rational, I don't mean like thinking rationally. I mean like being in a rational universe. Like reality is inherently rational. That would be a givenness, I think.
Reality is inherently rational. You know,
Is it?
you can kind of like call Hegel a rationalist if
I mean,
if you take it from Hegelian like language, you know, like because Hegel doesn't think there's anything that limits reason.
right. But remember, for Hegel, I do I do think that Hegel ends up saving rationalism because, you know, the axiom, right? The actual is rational. Except it doesn't mean what you think it means, you know, except it means that the rational becomes, no, the actual becomes the rational rather than the actual is rational.
He doesn't say the actual is rational.
So Hegel says the actual is the rational, right? But it doesn't mean the same thing as Kant's, let's say, identity of the actual being rational. For Hegel, the actual becomes the rational. So you have truth, and then this truth. You know what? I'll find the specific thing, and Didn't we talk about this recently?
The interesting thing, I'm looking up Sellers here. Sellers was a systematic, original, profound American philosopher. And in Sellers' work, there's left-wing Sellerians and right-wing Sellerians, which is very similar to Hegel.
That is very funny.
It is, yeah. And he's in the analytic school. And more significantly, he is known for his attack on the myth of the given and his development of a coherentist epistemology of functional role of inferentialist semantics from his distinction between manifest image and the scientific image of the world. For his proposal that psychological concepts are like theoretical concepts, and for a thought-minded scientific realism, Sellers can claim the first explicit formulation of a functionalist treatment of intentional states, an early recognition of the hard problem of sensory consciousness, and a thoroughgoing nominalism, as well as rich interpretations of historical figures of philosophy. So he's you know, it would be interesting to go in further, but I mean, I'm looking at this argument. It's a huge, like 12, 13 proposition argument.
Sellers is huge. It's very complicated.
Yeah.
But here is the actual versus rational thing from, I think I've read this before, from the Cambridge edition. Hegel's formulations of the rationality of the actual emphasize the dynamic and progressive aspect of the reason, which is at work actualizing itself in the world. So the reason becomes actual. The actual is also part of reason. Whereas for Kant, it's more like an identity that reality is rational. You know, this is the same givenness that Spinoza also takes. By the way, I think that the world is inherent. There is a rationality in the world. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Anything else, guys? I am a bit
Yeah, I'm at this stage.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop the recording.